So, welcome, Liza, to this latest open-ended conversation. Open-ended, as you now know, is a platform for activist designers and thinkers from around the world. Together, we're going to be exploring the spaces where creativity, culture, and design intersect with tech, science, and engineering, with a lens on challenging existing structures and narratives. We welcome everybody to join in as we bring a global, very diverse community of creators together through this initiative for design thinking and change. And you can follow us on Instagram and Spotify and YouTube. And I'm just going to introduce our latest guest, somebody that I'm a massive fan of and that I actually met a couple of years ago in person, but we've been working together through a project that I was working on at Google Arts and Culture, focusing on invention and technology. And the idea was that we were bringing together institutions from around the world that were showcasing ideas of innovation, discovery in different ways. And I'll tell you more about Liza, but the organization she has was really the epitome of that. And that's how we ended up connecting. But the woman driving this organization was in every way her own life force. So I think we're now friends. And we've been in touch a little bit over the last year or so, and we've come together again to really go a bit deeper into her own life, her career, and her dreams for the future through this open-ended chat. So Liza has been leading Index since 2018. She is responsible for the organization's vision, operations, and strategic direction. She joined originally in 2009, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that journey and how it unfolded. And very recently, she's also established Index's first global micro VC fund, which is going to be investing into the pipeline of the now very famous Index Award, which is the world's biggest prize for design for impact. Liza is actually from London, and her career background is super varied. She's worked in strategy, project management. She was previously based in Southeast Asia. She's worked in Bangkok with the UN. And she's a mentor and an advisor to businesses around the world with a social focus. And she sits on a few interesting boards and so on. So without further ado, Liza, welcome again to this open-ended conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sahai. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
So I want to start off a little bit with, what is Index? It would be awesome if you could give just, a couple of lines of an overview of what is the organization. And then I'd love to speak about you and your journey to joining them.
Yes. So Index is a non-profit organization. We're headquartered here in Copenhagen. So I'm talking to you from Denmark, in the chilly north. So as a non-profit organization, we're very much focused on design. And of course, being in Denmark, design being a brand that has international regard and of course has a lot of value and respect. We focus on design that improves people's life. So the focus on objects, products, services that can improve people's quality of life all around the world. So our main focus is the Index Award, as you mentioned in the intro. And the Index Award is a biennial design prize with a focus on sustainable solutions that are improving the world. And so the organization has been in existence for nearly 2 decades. And the kind of the crown jewel is the Index Award. And what we do beyond the Index Award is we run education programs where we train educators, leaders, and next generation in design thinking tools and methodologies to actually design objects, services, products, or at least some guardrails for how to actually improve people's life. And then on top of that, we also do investing. So we invest into projects that come through Index Award that are some of the best examples of how you can improve people's life through design. So that's what we do, and we've been around for some time. We've been running Index Award since 2005, and that has meant that we've come into contact with some amazing designers, entrepreneurs, technologists, scientists, artists, a broad range of people. But the onus is really the focus on people who are actually using design to improve people's life.
I mean, so for me, you've come into contact with all these people, but you've also helped to accelerate their thinking, their work, their vision in so many different ways. So it's amazing how you've been able to create an organization that really sits at this point of being in contact and bringing people together and creating a community, but equally accelerating and being a catalyst. So congratulations. So we're going to talk more about that in the Index Awards, but I want to know about you. You're not from Copenhagen at all. How did this come about? How did you end up joining?
So, yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it's actually one that I'm very proud of talking about because I think I'm a firm believer in serendipity and things happening for obviously the right reasons. So there's two stories. So the first story of how I even came to Denmark is because I'm married to a Dane. So I met my now husband while we were both studying in London. And obviously I followed him to Copenhagen. I got super inspired by the work-life balance and also just the quality of life in Denmark. But actually moved here
and
really
design,
because,
right? I mean, it's
design,
everywhere.
yeah, of course, and design. I kind of caught the bug and just wanted to explore. And with that came that sort of the first 6 months of exploration of Copenhagen, a really fantastic city, and in that. And actually, this was a really important detail because I think it's very poignant for now, particularly in our times of crisis. This was actually during the global financial recession in 2009, or it was just like just on the kind of like the midway point, I would say. So Morten, my husband, had just graduated from architecture school here in Copenhagen, and of course was going straight into unemployment. There were no jobs in architecture. And at the time I was working in the public sector in London. And we did the long distance thing for too long, and I decided to up sticks and actually move here. So I made the commitment to be here because I think we needed to readdress the balance in our personal life, but also just to have an adventure and to see something new. And yeah, so that first 6 months, particularly, and I'm sort of like speaking to all the graduates out there, design grads, students who are sort of like worried or anxious about their future careers or professions. I think the thing that we did was that we tried a lot of different things, as in, we volunteered for different film festivals. We explored all the different exhibition openings, and we went to galleries. We did a lot of, like you would say, leisurely things, but educating in the process. But we also had a lot of fun. You find yourself going to like drinks receptions where there were really fantastic kind of like snacks and drinks and things like that, and gallery openings, there's previews, there's so many things that are actually happening that one wouldn't ordinarily have the time to go to when one is working. And through that process of just going to public talks and lectures, I came across a really interesting talk at a design agency here in Copenhagen called Design It. They were hosting a community event around base of the pyramid innovation. And so we went along. I didn't think very much other than, free talks, great, good to learn something new. And I was blown away. I was so inspired. And I suddenly just felt the urge to volunteer, and I wanted to volunteer with the organization after hearing this fantastic talk. I met my predecessor. I didn't know who she was at the time, but I just said, listen, I really would love to help or do anything with whatever you need help with. And I think I was a bit persistent because at the time, we had surplus hours and just, really, time at our liberty, right? And at the time, Kiga was like, well, okay, well, you've done some work within strategy, policy, maybe you can help us write up this strategy we've just run some sessions with some leading
And can
experts.
you say who she was, a little bit of who she is?
Yeah, so my predecessor was a lady named Kiga Wild, and she was the founding CEO of Index. And so she started the organization way back in 2001, 2002, really incepted the idea. In effect, did a massive kind of global crowdsourcing of ideas from artists, corporate leaders, politicians, designers, to really co-create the philosophy of Index, and really the kind of like the foundation of Index. So she was really instrumental, and had been leading the organization up until around 2 years ago, where she stepped down. But she's been a huge driving force for the organization. I think if you can look back into the archives and very sort of recent history of her involvement, and of course her leadership, and she was very inspiring, and I learned so much through her. And of course she gave me the opportunity to join and really learn about the work that Index was doing at the time, and was actually at a place where the organization was starting to grow and mature and broaden its reach beyond just Denmark and the Nordics, and was starting to go international with some of its programming.
So when you joined, what would you say the mission was? What was the mission and the vision, and how much you think it's actually evolved based on what you're saying to the present day?
That's a good question, because at the time, the mission was to disseminate design to improve life, to inspire people, to educate, and actually at the time to start thinking about investing into the future. So when I joined, as I said, I had a collection of Post-it notes and notes that were collected from a workshop. So it's like, here, try and make a strategy out of this. So I was sort of dished up all these Post-it notes and had to make a document that resembled our strategy. And at the time, there were the two core themes, which I think are still relevant and still very interesting, even just as themes for people to explore now, again, in times of crisis, was how could we take Index from a central unit to a decentralized network? How could we activate people outside of the central hub in Copenhagen to be more involved, to be inspired, to activate their resources, to do more around designing solutions that could help people? So that was one of the core strategic goals. The second one was, how do we move away from just awarding backwards? So of course, with every design competition or design prize out there, it's the ideas are already relatively old, or maybe just, I wouldn't say old, but they're things that have happened in the past. So in a way, we're sort of we're celebrating post-event as opposed to looking forward and applying a foresight. So investing forward was, how do we help inspire the growth of companies that can actually manifest themselves into an impactful business. And of course, with a healthy and impactful business comes sort of scalability in terms of solutions being in the hands of their intended users, right? So there's no impact if the product or the service doesn't come to fruition, and no lives improved if that doesn't, if the idea doesn't become realized, right? So those were the two kind of sort of strategic goals at the time. And of course, that was back in 2009, which was, okay, so now we have these kind of like directions. How do we do this? There was no sort of like clear roadmap for how you would do it. So, sometimes you see these sort of 5-year plans. I mean, of course, with any plan, you take the essence of it and you sort of test and evolve. And we tried many different things.
But you're also breaking new ground, right? Like it's an open space. Nobody's done this before.
nobody's done this before, and you know, and it's also sort of like you're challenging yourself on so many levels. I mean, but I think the kind of the culture of the organization is to try and to experiment. I mean, to think and act and do like designers, really, in a way. So test things, you know, get your feedback, get your responses, see whether things work, if they don't work, you know, like learn some more, test some more. I mean, it was a continual process in that sense. But here we are in 2020, and it feels like we've aged that much more. Part of me still feels that those two core strategic goals are still very relevant. I still think we could do more in being more distributed. We could be doing more in terms of supporting entrepreneurs that are just not just focused in the Index Award pipeline, but doing more to support and enable the entire ecosystem, for instance. So yeah.
But then but how do you measure that? How did you set about, you had these goals, you started to build a system. How do you measure success? How do you say we are now more decentralized? Again, like what must have felt like an impossibility at the time. And are you constantly checking in every year against those same goals?
I'd like to think that there is kind of like a system to it, but I really don't think that we even thought that there was something that we could measure. I mean, actually, I think maybe yesterday was a moment where I really thought the decentralized thinking, okay, this is the moment now. And that's taken 10 plus years to feel that we've actually done something in the direction where we're going distributed. So we're actually doing a design challenge focused on Latin America as a response to COVID-19. So it's a challenge for designers, graduates under the age of 35 to respond to the pressing, urgent needs of life and livelihoods that are affected by COVID-19. And, you know, I think we've been trying to find a way of, in a way, broadening the work that we do outside of Index, outside of Copenhagen, and it has been really, really challenging. It's been really difficult to kind of, you know, take a brand that has, you know, maybe some cachet in the Nordics or within a very sort of confined design space, within that kind of realm of sustainability or social impact, and, you know, to say to everyone, well, this is relevant for everybody, you know, everyone should be part of it. But it's actually been very, very challenging and hard. We found ourselves maybe 3 months ago just looking at the statistics and the region being more and more affected, and of course the future looking more and more frightful, actually, in Latin America. I mean, a lot of regions around the world are very heavily affected, but we have had some strong partnerships in Chile, and we felt that this was the time to actually do something and actually sort of step out of ourselves and say, no, it isn't about Index. This is about actually supporting our partner locally and saying, okay, we'll do everything we can to support you in this endeavor, and you have to lead the way. So please just, you know, access whatever you need from Index, because we'll help leverage you. And I think that was just a real sort of reflex of saying, well, you know, that was it's urgent and it's needed, and it isn't about helping Index. This is about a morality thing of saying we need to respond now.
So I think it's also bold to say, like, we're trying to spread our own base, our own umbrella. We want to be global, and then to say, now we're going to come to you because we have our story. We want you to own this story because you need it.
Yeah.
And so this was 3 months ago. So what I wanted to wrap on is the first thing you said was that I love your story of coming to Copenhagen and saying, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know what happens next. My husband has graduated at a time of recession. I just finished teaching a course at the Architectural Association. Everybody has a different journey laid out in front of them, but probably has not been a time of so much uncertainty across the world in our lifetimes. It feels so global, but equally to your point of staying open to opportunity and continuing to enjoy the things that inspire you will always lead to something. It might not be your next job, but it could be this one person that opens up a door for you that changes maybe the next month of your life. And that I think is really easy for all of us to forget in this moment of time, right?
It is. And I think this is also, I mean, deep personal reflections of just understanding yourself. You know, this is kind of like the housekeeping that we just don't do for ourselves, you know, in terms of our mental well-being, and just checking in with ourselves and saying, you know, it's not just doing, you know, some online yoga or some meditation. This is actually going deep and asking yourself, you know, what are my preferences? You know, what are the things that drive and motivate me? You know, where do I find purpose? And you know, I also feel that we've lost touch with vocation. Actually, you know, it's almost like being having a kind of a vocationally led life is not something that we think about, because it's about careers, professions. You know, you have to sort of you know, in a way, like constantly measure yourself against, you know, maybe your peers or whatever, but actually your lifelong calling as a vocation. What is your vocation? I mean, I think being a designer, you want to be a problem solver. You want to be able to articulate, okay, what that solution is and be able to help. And that's kind of where I sort of found myself coming to Index, because suddenly, you know, so I studied at SOAS in London and Goldsmiths. And of course, going to SOAS, you know, you want to save the world. You know, you want to go to developing countries and be able to help people out of poverty, which is, of course, what I did. I went to Thailand. I did a little stint in the UN there and realized actually this isn't quite the same calling that I had hoped for. But that need to serve people and to be able to help, or feeling that you care enough because you really, really want to see some impact and to see some improvement in the world, right? And I see that kind of slight resonance with designers as well, in wanting to solve problems and you know, in a way to be the fixer.
You facilitated that for them, because I think that that's what was missing, is that exists in the world of development, these funds and these mechanisms, and it didn't exist in design. And so to come to the award, if you can tell us a bit about the award, I'm really curious. You know, I've obviously read about like Architecture for Humanity prizes, and then there's, you know, the breakthroughs in medical design and so on and so forth, but the prize has evolved over time, and I'm super curious about, you know, what is the prize and how has it changed? Are the ideas sort of similar in their hopes and aspirations, but different in their execution and the sophistication of their technology? Or are you seeing that the world has changed and so the problems that we're addressing have changed? I'm very curious just to get from your perspective an overview of that and how you guys run it year after year.
Sure. So the prize is so the prize was really created in 2005. And actually, any sort of historian or design historian has to sort of look back and see where the world was technology-wise. So it's a little bit of both, and in your question, that at the time, yes, the technology was sort of in a different place. So when you look back into the archives, I mean, it's really fantastic to be reminded of how far we've come. So of course the advancement of technology has really sort of shifted the solution making in some ways. Where the world has shifted and changed, yes, that has changed as well, in terms of, yeah, how people consume certain technologies, how behaviors have changed for good and for bad. So we definitely see other types of symptomatic things that have happened over the course of 20 years. The award framework hasn't actually changed since the start. And I think this is actually quite an interesting perspective, because on the one hand, you know, with other traditional awards or maybe award frameworks, you typically have verticals of product design, graphic design, industrial design. You know, you have all your different disciplines sort of broken up into different chunks. Ours are more vertical, so we look at human lifespan as our kind of like as our horizontal, and the verticals are mainly based on aspects of people's life, so designs relating to the body, designs relating to community, designs relating to home, play and learning, etc. So I think we challenged the framework of how a design should be constructed, and in that way it opens up more interdisciplinary interpretations of various different types of design. So suddenly we're not looking at just a book being something that's in the graphical realm. We're looking at maybe a book from an educational and a learning perspective. So much rather focus on the outcome rather than the vehicle or the formatting. And that has been very consistent, and I think that makes actually interesting kind of like sort of archive material. We have a searchable database where we can track through every single nomination since the start of the Index Awards, and we've kind of like sort of looked into our sort of selfish, nerdy kind of selves, and we would love to be able to make these comparisons and see, okay, well, what were the main challenges that happened in 2011, and what were the types of solutions that came in, and maybe that has some resonance of patterns in terms of what happened in the past and how designers responded. And we fall into the trap of repeating ourselves. So in a way, if there's any predictive patterns that we can collect and look forward into the future, maybe we can start predicting how we would be able to address equally, sort of emerging problems or emerging challenges, right?
And equally in solutions, I think that's amazing to think about the things that work over and over again. And you guys have this massive repository of that now at this point. Yeah. But I would love to see. So as somebody who works in tech, for me, that is always the most resonant, is the idea of being holistic, being interdisciplinary, not sitting in silos. And also how somehow human nature pushes us to do that, to like create buckets and boundaries, because maybe it's simplifying for us an approach to the world. And exactly. and that, of course, holds us back from what you've described as design for impact. Okay, so the prize...
And also, so go just ahead. One thing to that, because I think on the one hand, it's also the human nature aspect is you don't want to just be a data point, because there's a story there, and there's an impactful story that can captivate people on an emotional level. So if we talk about how we drive and motivate designers to do something that's fundamentally going to change someone else's life, we need to be able to impact them emotionally in a meaningful way, right? So their stories of either, the successes, the failures, the difficulties that everyone can relate to. And I think that's also really important, is that it's a balance between, looking at these patterns and being able to say, from a sort of a reasonably kind of accurate way, okay, this is the type of pattern we should see in terms of future solution making. But then equally, we also have to remember the story and the human story there.
Do you have any examples? I mean, because for me, all of, you said you look at it both ways, right? In terms of both funding an idea that might become something, and then equally being backward looking and awarding a prize to an organization that has figured it out. I mean, there must be so many amazing stories where, you've seen something because it was a story of the designer, and equally now you started a venture fund and you look so much to the founder, right, as much as the idea, because it's going to evolve. Is there anything that really surprised you? Any one prize where you weren't really sure how it will work out, or you wish you had given the money and you hadn't?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, I think, okay, so going to the inspiring, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind actually is Duolingo. So they were one of our winners in 2015. I say they, but Luis and his co-founder and team. And, hugely inspiring. I mean, his personal story and the red thread. So okay, I'm going to come back to that resonance of like students, grads who are listening here. I mean, and following that red thread throughout your life, which is to focus on your purpose and your reason for being. So he has an incredibly great story about growing up in Guatemala and seeing how the disparity between access to education can lead to obviously sort of employability, and of course access to learning English at schools also meant that you'd be advantaged in terms of being able to get good jobs and having a better standard of living. And of course, that access to education is really the kind of the key to breaking that cycle of poverty. And so it was his dream to focus on a project that could actually help and enable people to grow and to live a better life. So I think that a very personal story and building a company like Duolingo, which is as democratic as it gets, right? So you have the likes of Bill Gates using Duolingo, as do you have kids in rural Guatemala learning different languages, free and accessible and open. And I think the reason for being there is so clear and super inspiring. Of course, yes, if we had the opportunity to invest at the time, of course, but that doesn't take away from the fact that I think so highly of Duolingo, and I think so highly of Luis and his team. I recently spoke with him. I say recently, but about a year ago, and his that hasn't escaped the core being of how he founded the organization and how they've grown. I mean, they've kept it very much focused on the purpose, and I think that's hugely inspiring as a leader, and that's hugely inspiring as a company that's growing commercially, but then also in terms of impact, how it's creating opportunities for people all around the world. I think it's incredible, and a lot that we can all learn from, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so taking this story and coming to what you're doing right now, this is now you being a designer. You've designed a whole new part of Index, and I recommend that everybody goes online. There's a couple of videos of you speaking about your new venture firm that I think are really, really inspiring and motivating, but equally will help to unpack a little bit more your vision. Can you tell us a bit about the fund, why you decided on a fund after the prize, after so many years of this incredibly successful prize? What was the motivation there, and what are the kinds of organizations and companies and individuals that you're looking to get to apply to this?
Sure. So it comes back to that core strategic goal, which was to look ahead and how do we invest forward. And at the time, I was really focused on actually not doing a fund, doing everything but running an investment fund. A number of reasons for that, because first of all, I'm not versed in corporate finance. I know at the time I knew nothing, and probably had a slight sort of inferiority complex about it, or very daunted. Could happily dish away access to pipeline or connections and just catalyze where I could catalyze, and again, it wasn't sticking. There was no sort of sticking point. I could kind of get people to say, well, that's it's really interesting. It would be really great. You've got great numbers in terms of number of companies coming through Index One. It looks really, really interesting. But nobody was really doing it, as in sort of actually doing the active investing, or and I felt that the missing ingredient was to have a driving force. And we partnered up with some people who wanted to help us, probably weren't the best skilled people to help us, and subsequently we parted ways. And the idea was to build an investment fund that could invest directly into the Index Award companies. And I think that process of sort of like getting partnered up with the wrong type of partner, learning from that, but then also that was a classic example of, well, we needed to do our own homework. We needed to go back to the drawing board ourselves and really ask ourselves, why do we really want to do this? I mean, because one thing is, well, because it's clever people in the strategy session, you know, like some years ago said that we should do it, but actually why? And for whose benefit? And what would the motivation be? So round 2, we modeled up a structure that leveraged on all the things that Index is great at, right? So the idea isn't to be in an to grow an investment fund and take a leading position in any of these companies, and as in take board roles or such. You know, the idea was that we co-invest with leading investors. So we follow. We invest small amounts. We consider ourselves light touch investors, so we're not there to interfere with the company's business. Founders are busy enough as it is, so we're just happy to support and leverage on the things that we're good at. So supporting around design thinking, maybe helping with sparring on specific challenges, and using kind of our toolbox of different methods and tools that a founder, or, you know, the company would need. So we're there if they need us. Also, what was important for us was that we could be the investor that supported founders around their mission. So, you know, typically when a company is starting to grow and start raising more and more financing rounds, you know, you have bigger league investors coming in who maybe are not so, you know, then maybe not so worried, or maybe maybe they potentially don't even care that you're doing something that's actually important in the world.
Yeah, the story.
So it's a classic sort of, well, you need to be focused on the revenues, you need to be focused on your quarterly targets. And I think for us, maybe what suits us is to be able to remind founders that they're doing something that's really purposeful and impactful in the world. And they're serving specific needs, and that's why you did it as a founder. You came up with this genius technology or this design, this solution, and to be reminded of that.
Oh, that's really so important. Powerful. That is, it's very rare, as of course you know, but like just this idea of reminding where you started from. And I've had projects at work where we've gone off into like, what's the business model, what's the ROI, and you need a really brave voice in the room to say, wait a second, what did we start off wanting to do? Let's come back there. And that's really, really difficult. And I think there's something really safe and comforting about knowing that your investor is actually prioritizing that, and really beautiful. So are these guys, are you still funding organizations that are coming through the awards, or are you looking now to a broader base? And also, who are these investors that you're sort of partnering with? How are you finding them? Are they coming to you? I'm very curious about that model, because again, that's very unusual. Yeah, we are still investing in companies that come through Index Awards. So of course, again, it's designed to, in a sense, support the Index Award and the non-profit arm of the organization. So it's the business model is that, you know, whatever management fee, carried interest, successes, is to be plowed back into the organization. You know, I think, you know, with anyone who's in the business of non-profits and charity, etc., there is such thing as mission diffusion. You know, you could just be focused on, you know, whichever grants and pots of funding that are very, very focused on specific mandates, and I think you just end up becoming so diluted. So this was a way of saying, nope, our jury in Index Award are selecting some excellent cases of what design to improve life is. We can prove the thesis that to be invested or to focus on solutions that are improving people's life can actually make business sense as well, and can generate returns. So it has to be robust in the sense that it's competitive with other investment funds out there.
The type of investors that we bring in, of course, it's high risk. This isn't charity. There's still an expectation to deliver returns. But the investors that we bring in to support our investment fund are typically fairly close to doing direct investments themselves. So they understand the capacity of being, getting your sleeves rolled up. They understand sort of maybe the hardships of what it's like to be a founder, but also sympathetic to the fact that, yes, impact investing just has a longer time horizon, and demands a different type of optics, so it's not just about focusing on, the exits and when are the exits happening as such, but just actually lending support and being able to leverage on their networks as well.
I mean, I do wonder if we're in this moment of time, like, not to be too simplistic, but where everybody is beginning to appreciate more the idea of what is slow and what needs time to manifest and incubate, and if that's going to create more space for the kind of work and the kind of investments that you guys are encouraging, because we've been in this crazed rush. I can speak from a technology perspective, investing and expecting returns and watching things burn.
But I think this is it, right? I mean, I think, it's like we're obsessed with growth, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's kind of like, it's almost like an infection. You need to grow. You need to grow fast, and you need to grow at any cost. But with anything, what is the biggest cost to growing, right? It comes at a cost of destruction. It comes at the cost of, extracting resources that we can't regenerate fast enough. So there are the consequences to it. So it's almost like, we've done it to ourselves in a way to neglect the opportunity cost, that we're growing and we're doing it in a lean way, but there's no fat around the bone. So the moment that there's some risks that we're exposed to, we don't have the fat to sustain ourselves. So we've kind of done it to ourselves in a way, right? So what's the reserve? What's the thing that we can kind of like leave forward for our next generation? So I have a 6-year-old son, and so when he was at kindergarten, they used to do these little trips up to the park, and what they would do is they would go and collect rubbish. And I think of course, educational, kids, learning about the consequences of just littering and making sure that, you do your civil duty. But it's also a little bit grotesque that we have our kids cleaning up our mess. We're responsible, so-called educated adults. And we've kind of, and I'm using the metaphor, I'm using it in a very, very broad way, but we've made such a mess. So how do we feel our moral duty to leave something that we feel proud, and also paying respect to a new generation that will just know so much better than us? We're not that clever, actually. What it comes down to is just we just have to accept that, there are just younger people out there that just know so much more. Yes, it's our duty to coach them and give them the confidence and to make space for them. But I think it's a real paradox. And of course, this metaphor of like my son coming back telling me how many cigarette butts he's picked up and everything. It's like, this is a proud thing, and I'm like, well, no, it's really embarrassing. It's really horrific that we do that. That we have such little responsibility for our actions. So I'm speaking more broadly, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, for me, your entire career, at least with Index, is you've been creating space for others, whether it's to share their ideas or to grow on their dreams and to build on their aspirations. So for me, you're somebody who has spent years and years of time and energy creating space for others. And for me, that is the most powerful thing, is you've been able to do it beyond just for yourself and in your own space and in your own work. So we only have a few minutes left, Liza. So I just want to ask you now, to close off, what is next? What is your dream for the future? What is the manifesto you want to leave us with, whether it's personal, whether it's through Index? I'd love to hear it.
And actually, I've had I've given it a lot of time and thought, and actually this is it's kind of part inspired by the work that I do at Index, but also part, you know, very personal and just out of my own kind of curiosity. So I think pre my current role, so when a few years back, I had toyed with the idea of or just the idea in general around heirlooming, right? I don't think we think too much about, you know, the objects, the things that we leave behind. But the idea of things that, and I say things in, again, a very broad sense, so they could be ideas, they could be recipes, they could be objects, methods that that we've lost, you know, through, you know, whether it's the passing of relatives or whether it's just historically lost in kind of a time vacuum. And I've wanted to do a project about heirlooming for the future. So, you know, what ideas, what thoughts, what objects, you know, what kind of nuggets of wisdom could we feel proud about heirlooming to the next generation, right? And it doesn't have to be sort of within the design space. It could be, for instance, like, you know, a recipe. Like I didn't grow up with my grandmother, and I only learn about her personality and her characteristics through my mum's kind of memories. And, you know, there were things about my grandmother in terms of how she cooked and what she cooked. And of course, that's just going to be like a sort of a sort of spoken tradition that passes as long as I remember these things. But I would love to be able to have a place where we could captivate these heirlooms for the future, right? I think more and more we're very aware of and very conscientious of our footprint, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of you know, the things that we've collected in our lifetime and maybe in our ancestors' lifetime that are good and actually worth keeping and worth cherishing, as a way of kind of respecting our future generations, to give them something that they can hear, you know, as a collection of things, of heirlooms that you can learn from.
Yeah, and not just things, right? Because you've spoken with me a little bit about the idea of your intersectional identity and who you bring. Why do you feel the way you do in your work? Why did you choose to go and work for the UN in Bangkok? Why did you end up starting this fund? Why are you working with Index? All of these things come back to who you are and what you represent. And not all of us are going to fit in. Most of us don't feel like we fit in, no matter if everybody looks and sounds like us. And so if you can actually lean into that and capture that, how special.
Yeah. I think we're so obsessed with the future. I think that's also what it is, you know, the newness. But sometimes there's so much wisdom in the old, and we're too quick to think that, you know, the new is better. I don't think that's always the case. Anyway, I think that's just a kind of a hope
beautiful.
for the future.
I love that. It's so true. We will not only the immediate future, and as you say, the future vision. And in your work, you probably come across so many people who are able to find that balance.
Yeah.
I want to see your grandmother's heirlooms laid out somewhere. So we're going to hopefully be able to work with you on this in some capacity. So we will come back to it. But until then, this was too short. I think you and I need to meet, hopefully, selfishly, offline.
I hope so.
And maybe in Copenhagen, maybe in London, maybe in Islamabad, who knows.
Please do. Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you so much for your time, Liza. I really appreciate it. I know the whole team at Open Ended has been thrilled to have you, and will be furiously scribbling down ideas for the future based on this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahai. Thank you.